Now, sometimes you just want to talk about a game, and normally I wouldn't write a long script, and I did start doing that, but I decided I'm just going to sit back and talk about a game that I really enjoyed, and it compelled me to 100%, which I normally don't do. So, what exactly is Humanity? It was developed by The Limited, which isn't like your standard video game developer, but they're more in charge for like experimental art pieces, I guess, in Japan. And it was published by Enhanced Games, which are the people behind Tetris Effect, which I've never talked about on this channel, but I actually really enjoy if I'm ever in the mood for some Tetris. Now, apparently this game came out in 2023. Now I say apparently because I do not remember it doing that, but better late than never. I do remember it showing up as State of Play for Sony, but that's about all I remember of it before it's released, and then it kind of just flew under my radar personally. But then it came back in Astrobot of all things, and for some reason, I guess it came out of like the recesses of my mind, I guess. I was like, oh, that's the dog from that game I remember seeing. So that's the first part about why I started playing this. But then the second part is that I recently bought a PSVR 2, and I was like, I need to find video games for this thing. And turns out Humanity has a VR mode. So I was like, okay, there we go. It's time to play this game. Then I had to wait like a week and a half to like 2 weeks to get it, because for whatever reason this game did not have a physical copy of it, which is kind of weird considering Tetris Effect and all those games had physical editions, but this game didn't. But thankfully, or not really thankfully, it had a limited run release, which is sort of, I guess, better than nothing. But then that means I had to pay like a premium for it to buy it off somebody on eBay. So I'm not exactly proud to admit that, but it eventually got here. I started playing in VR, and I got through the first chapter of it before I was like, okay, this is really cool in VR. I'm glad that I switched off of the VR mode to just playing it standard, because this game is kind of hard. This game's pretty difficult in some places, and I'm not afraid to admit that it took me 45 plus minutes on some of these levels, and just standing there in VR looking down at this one level for 45 minutes just does not seem all that appealing to me. And while you can play it sitting down in VR, so there's always that, and I just figured it would also be easier to record too, because I've never recorded VR2 games myself, but so I recorded the first chapter. I got done and went to look at the recording, and it had this giant like border on it that I only learned about afterwards, so I had to re-render the game. So apparently that border is for if you put it on an external display, it helps the PSVR 2 track better, because it's the cameras on the headset itself use it as like a basis to like track stuff. So I had to re-render that whole like hour and a half of gameplay just so it didn't have the border around it. So the VR footage you're viewing right now might look a little blurry, and that's because I had to like shrink it down screen, so you weren't just looking at this in like a border that fit like a third of the screen, mind you. So in this game you play as a little Sheena Evu, and you have to guide the people to the end of the stage, to the lights. So yeah, you can put as many like heaven like analogies as you want right here, because it definitely fits. And they definitely like lean into that a little bit in the story. I didn't really pay attention to the story all that much. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It kind of leans into those sorts of themes of like what it means to be human, and just morality, and like the things that make a human. Because the story starts out and you're playing as this little dog, and you're like talked to by like these cores that task you with finishing these trials, and these trials are apparently supposed to teach the humans about different things. Like at the end of one chapter they'll be like, this, now that you've completed these trials, these humans have learned what wisdom is, and that sort of stuff. And then your goal is to like give humanity back to the humans, because it's kind of implied that something happened, that the humans created something. They created something that like killed them all off, I guess, and now you're kind of rebuilding them back to what they were, so they can retry, I guess, like try again in this new world. I guess it doesn't really matter if you know what's going on in the story, because what you're really here for are the puzzles. And it's kind of like Lemmings. If you ever played Lemmings, I have not, but I've seen gameplay of it, and yeah, I can see where the obvious inspiration came from that. Which, did you know that Lemmings is owned by Sony? Which is kind of a weird thought, because as I've done more research for like different videos and such, like this does not really fit in to what they're known for. But for whatever reason, they own Lemmings. And as I've done more research into like Sony's past, I guess it makes more sense why this thing is more associated with Sony. It definitely does feel like that sort of experimental game that you'd see on the PS1. And I mean, there's one specific game that came to my mind immediately, and that's Intelligence Cube. I mean, if you take a look at that game and this game, the person in that game you play as looks almost exactly like the people that you control in this game. And the blocks are also the same, and I feel like there's definitely some obvious inspiration there as well, which I really appreciate because I love Intelligence Cube personally. It's one of my favorite games of all time, actually. That might be surprising to some people, because if you look at my other videos and you look at me, do I exactly look like I enjoy puzzle games? No. But you know, I do enjoy myself a good puzzle game every once in a while. So either way, your goal is to lead all these people to the light. And to do that, you have a few different commands. Turn, which just makes them go in a different direction. You get 3 different types of jumps, where they jump a high jump where they jump really high, and then a long jump, which they jump very long, you could have guessed. And with those basic actions, you pretty much have to just lead them across different things, and as different like levels. And certain levels have blocks that you can climb, but the issue is trying to fit all of your commands into like the designated spots, because one thing you realize very quickly is that they like to have it so what may seem extremely easy from the offset actually isn't, because you have to place your commands like diagonal to each other, sort of. Like you can't have a command like at the beginning of the stage when you're mapping out a route. You might put your commands in places that you might not realize until later, which might clash with something you might want to do later. So you'll place a turn, and then they'll go through the rest of the level, and then they'll come back to where you place that first turn, and you're like, oh well, I need them to turn a different direction here. But you can't put that turn in line with the other turn, because then it's going to screw up the beginning of it. And that's kind of where the biggest difficulty came from at the very beginning, trying to finagle and figure out where to place your turns so they fit into the level. That is until later on when they start introducing different things like floating, which is this command that lets them essentially fall from any distance. Because if you have your people running off a ledge and they have a block that's more than 2 blocks down, then they'll just die. They'll disappear. And luckily you don't have to worry about like running out of people if there's a door that they come out of, unless, well, we'll get to that. Soon they'll start introducing the others, which is like your humanity's evil doppelganger, and their whole goal is to just pretty much get in your way and screw you over. And they also want to get your Goldie, which the Goldies are like these gold people that are kind of out of the way, that are more difficult to find. Or they're not difficult to find, but they're difficult to get to and lead to the goal. And they serve as your main collectible, where if you collect enough, then you'll unlock things like different abilities, like being able to stop time or speed up time. And you can also get different models and different colors for your people, so you can make them stuff like gold or silver or dogs or spheres or words. Normally new things are introduced in chapters as the game goes on, and they'll always bring back old stuff from old chapters to add to the new stuff, and it just continues to pile on different things to make puzzles even more confusing. And in that chapter where you get introduced to the others, at the first they're kind of just in the way, but by the end they start getting really angry, so they start grounding bats and guns and start shooting and killing your people. Like, okay, this is getting really serious. And then the next chapter, which is called War, you get the command to give your people guns and bats. And that was kind of fun figuring out like different like formations that you have to put your people in. That way that they can take on like the onslaught of others. And they really stress the fact that if you're giving your people guns, you want to make sure that they're like in giant rows so that more people can shoot at once. Because if you're just having your line of people going straight into like the enemy, only the front people in that row are going to end up shooting. So they're going to be able to just slowly but surely take out your row all the way back down to the door, which I haven't even talked about doors, but some levels you'll have just a set amount of people that are just in a spot at the start where you're going to send them. But other times most of the time you'll have a door which just shoots out endless streams of people. And the kind of meta goal in those levels where you're fighting people is to destroy the door. That way no more others can show up and kill you, and if you do that, you're pretty much figured out the level. Eventually you'll get the follow command, which lets the people run behind you, and they'll follow you wherever you go, as the name would suggest. Which leads to much more organic puzzle solving, because you might realize that everything is set up on a grid. So it can feel quite, I don't know how you'd say this, not rudimentary, not, I guess, less organic, more robotic, and that you definitely see how all the pieces connect together. With this, instead of just going in straight lines, you can have them zigzag all over the place. And it leads to much more action-y levels, if you will. They really do get a whole lot of different puzzles out of these things. And that isn't even all of them, but I guess I do want to leave a few surprises for you, in case you want to pick up this game for yourself. Then there's the music, which is so strangely hypnotic that it kind of puts you in a trance. At first it seems very alien, it's very weird, if that makes any sense. It's very interesting, very weird, very out there. But eventually it just becomes second nature and you get used to all these weird musical tracks. Maybe you've already realized how weird it is, considering I've been playing it in the background of this video. Alright, what else? As the dog, you can dive through crowds of people, so you like possess them and then you can move along them. It's very satisfying to do, especially since the DualSense controller vibrates every time you move one, so it's like all the way through them. It feels so good on the hands. There was definitely some points where I was frustrated. Did those frustrating parts outweigh the pure joy I was feeling playing this game? No, not really. So yeah, that's how I felt about this game.